What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over entering the same hit reaction or same state from, well, the state you're in. Or also transferring between different hit reactions, so say you get hit by a high, then a mid, then a low, you can actually do that transition. So essentially, if I hit my opponent and then I hit them again, they should re-enter the same state that they were in, right? We don't want them to continuously finish their animation and then go to the next one after. We want to cancel out the state that we're in, re-enter the state that they were in, and play the animation again. This is important not only for looking nice during combos so that each hit feels like it registered, but it's also important logically so you know, oh, this attack has this much hit stun, this many frames of stun, then we need to make sure that that animation is reflecting that properly. Otherwise, people could misread certain things, like if they can attack, if they're going to be able to recover in time, different things like that. So yeah, the important part is being able to re-enter the same state, but then once I stop attacking, they can return to idle. Also, hitting them and sending them to the proper hit stun state and transferring between all of them. So it should be a pretty simple episode in terms of what we have to do, but the way it kind of works is a little bit complex because it has to do with the order of things in the state machine, in the nmbp. And only specific orders will work. You could use a montage to accomplish something similar, but I actually think it has some downsides here. Because of the way you'd have to set up the montage, it would be more annoying to do so. So I'm going to show you how we can use multiple state transitions from one state to another state and perform this in a pretty easy method, in my opinion, and in a clean method. This method should not ruin anything in the future. I don't see it causing trouble for combos or anything like that. The only thing that we may need to adjust is when we get into, say, you get into a juggled state or something like that. We need to make sure that we're keeping track of all of our states when we're doing these things. That way we're not setting the character state incorrectly. But I don't think that that limits us here. It just means we have to be a little bit careful. So, before I get started, we're on episode 77 of the Fighting Game Tutorial series, so we're pretty far along. So if you'd like to catch up on anything that we did, or just kind of see how the series is going, I'll leave a link to the playlist right here, so you can catch up from the very beginning. Otherwise, we can go ahead and get started. Now, the nmbp is still ugly, and I apologize. I really do need to clean this up. However, we're not going to be making it much more ugly today. I mean, we kind of are. But the actual transitions are pretty easy to understand, so I don't think it'll be too confusing. The main thing that's going to be a little bit confusing are the rules, but it being ugly in here doesn't really hurt us for that at all. So, okay. Our goal is, as I said, to be able to go from one state back to the same state. So if we're in hit stun, if we're in mid hit stun, or just a mid hit reaction, or heck, even any hit reaction, any animation, we want to be able to go back to that animation. And so we accomplish this in something with our light attack by resetting the light attack state. So we had this command to go from idle to light attack by pressing the light attack button, right? And on the state itself, we had always reset an entry. That way, if the operation and the transition was performed again while in the light attack state, we could go back into the state. Now, that's good, but that's when the user is supplying an input. We have to also be able to do this automatically based on information that's coming in, so it's a little bit different and a little bit more complicated. So in this case, we want to be able to go from our idle to our mid-hit reaction, and then our hit reactions back to themselves. So idle to mid, idle to high, idle to low, and then all of those to themselves if they take damage again while they're in these states. So to do that, we need to be able to return to idle quickly and then instantly go back, or have another state to transition to and transition back. Now, if we go to idle and then transition back, this will work because we're using always reset on entry here. So what would actually happen is it will take the transition, notice that it does not need to stay in idle, or it has a transition that it can take, and instantly go to it. We hit on this a little bit on the last episode, but the way that the order works, and I'm not going to pretend I know all of them because there are a lot, but essentially the start transition rule occurs, if I could find out which one that is. The start transition rule occurs before we get to the state, and then once the state is here, the transition has been taken, we go into entered state. Fully blended is when there's no other animations in the blend. It's just going off of the state alone. And then we leave state is when we're ready to take the exit transition. And then the exit transition, if I could find that one, it goes back to idle, and then idle does its logic. So if we do this right, we can kind of abuse this system to skip states, and we can skip the transition from the hit reaction to idle, and just go from hit reaction, idle transition, back to the hit reaction. And that's exactly what we want to do. Now, again, I've not had any issues with this in the past. There may be some cases where, certain anim montages or certain conditions end up making this a little bit more complicated or don't allow it to blend properly. If that's the case, then we will have to sort that case by case. But as far as I know, there aren't any issues. So if you guys see any, let me know. But otherwise, we're going to hop into this now. So, just a quick recap of what we have. We have idle to mid hit reaction. And the only condition here is that character state must be stunned mid. Basically, be attacked in a way that can trigger this hit reaction. The way it's done in this game is that the attack type was a mid attack. So the character is performing a mid hit reaction. If we're in the mid hit reaction state, we want to check always reset on entry. If you don't check this, then you won't be able to skip the idle state. It will actually wait until we fully exit and enter another state. And that's not good. That's not what we need here. We want to be able to enter our own state from ourselves. Enter mid-hit reaction from mid-hit reaction. So we want to make sure on all of these states that we have, so mid-hit reaction, high hit reaction, and low hit reaction should have always reset on entry. Now, another thing, entered state event. Now we need to do something here to determine, what we want to do after we've entered the state. So we've entered the state and we want to play the mid-hit reaction animation. But we need to make it so that we have a condition that can bring us back to mid-hit reaction. So unless you want to make a new variable or a new condition to do this, we're going to have to reset the state that got us here in the first place. If I could find it. Here we go. So idle to mid-hit reaction is E-stun mid. If we reset this, we don't instantly leave this transition. Okay? We don't instantly leave this animation that we're in. We still are going to sit here and play the mid-hit reaction. This end stun animation event that's at the entered state event slot here in this transition, on the animation state itself for mid-hit reaction, is actually going to change our state. Now, to be completely honest, it doesn't really matter what state we change to here. We are still going to be stunned and we're still going to be unable to move. But we do need to change our state because we need to be able to re-enter the state under the same condition. So I'll explain that in a second. But this is going to be changing our state. We may want to make a new state for this in the future, and in fact we most likely will, but for now I'm not going to do that because I haven't decided exactly how I want every state to transition to another. I'm currently in the process of this, and until I do that, I don't want to try implementing anything because it might just make me remove it. So instead of doing that, we're just going to set it to the recovery state here when this happens, since I don't have any specific rules when stunned and in recovery. Right now, they're completely independent of each other, so setting it to the recovery state does not hurt me at all, does not hurt my character's movement or the functionality of the match at all. But we are going to want to make sure we are really careful with our states, like I mentioned early on. So I've made a note of this, and we will fix this accordingly when we get more states that are related to combos and things where this is going to become really necessary. Each of these hit reaction states, the mid, low, and high, are all going to have the same event, end stun animation. And I call it end stun animation. That's not necessarily accurate as a name. It should probably just be end stun transition or something, Basically, it's saying that we've entered the state. We're through the transition. We can re-enter this state at this point. So let's go ahead and add this now just so I can show you what this looks like. If you go into your event graph, you can search for these. You may be familiar with this by now, but you just search for the name that you put in that little text box. So I have end stun animation. You want the event. Once you click it, it will pop this up. And I'm just setting the character state to be recovery. Again, this is subject to change. When we get into combos and where we need to be very, very careful with the states that we're in, this may change. But for now, this is perfectly fine. Just pick a state that's independent from the stun states. That way we can reset the state to be stunned if the character is hit again. You could even call this like stun recovery and it would be valid. Basically, it's just you are still stunned, but you can be stunned again at this point. Now, if we go back into our graph, the transitions from idle to these states are done. Now, the way to re-enter this is, as I said, to basically trick the state machine in a way that just follows its own logic, where it's going to try and bring us to a different state, such as idle, and then replay the state by skipping this, realizing that it can enter another state. So, we had the mid-hit reaction to idle before, and it was automatic rule-based on, and it's going to say sequence player in state. This really long thing. And essentially what that means is it will, once the animation is done playing, it will take the transition if there are no other suitable transitions that are of higher priority. Because of this, we want to disconnect this. We don't want to automatically take this transition. We're essentially going to have two conditions where we can transition out of the stun. We can transition out of the stun if we are hit and enter another stun, or if we want to return to idle because the animation has completed and then the character can go back to playing as normal. And so we're going to do the double transition rule. And I know this looks a little bit weird, but it's true. You can have more than one transition rule, more than one condition. And the reason you do this is you may want to have an event on one and not the other. So I'm going to do this off to the side so you guys can see what's going on, because right now there is too much. But say I have two states. I have state 1 and state 2. These can quite literally, you can have multiple transitions. Here's one. And sometimes you got to click into something to get the little roll thing to appear. But if I do this again, you can see that it moved over. Say I enter something, come back out. I have two transition rules. You have two different ways that you can transition to this state. Now, one being false and the other being true will still take it. Basically, either of these are valid. So it's essentially like an OR. But the reason this is useful is you can determine different events and determine different logic based on which one is taken. So this is what I've done for all of the states that I have here. For the mid-hit reaction, high-hit reaction, low-hit reaction, I have two. Low hit reaction to idle has 1 and 2. Mid hit reaction to idle has 1 and 2. And high hit reaction to idle has 1 and 2. Now they're all going to follow the same logic outside of the variable we have to have true to the condition we have to have true to re-enter the state. So try and follow along, but it shouldn't be too complicated, even though there is a lot of junk in here. So low hit reaction to idle, let's do that one first. Make sure it is not automatic rule based and there's no event on your first one here. Go into it. Now, we want to basically mimic the automatic rule based rule because it's a good rule. In this case, we are setting our character's animation for being stunned in relation to how long the hit stun occurs. So the animation plays for the amount of hit stun. And we don't necessarily want to lose that functionality. We still want to be able to do that. So our one transition rule looks like this. We right click and do get relevant anim time remaining with our animation here. There's a lot of names that are similar here, but this is the one you want. Get relevant anim time remaining. And this will basically check how much time in seconds the animation that is currently playing has before it's finished. And since it's not set to loop, it will run out. And we want to check if it's less than or equal to 0. You can give it a little bit of buffer if you're nervous. If you think, you know, maybe it blends and it could screw things up, which is technically possible, but we haven't gotten into all that complicated stuff yet. So unless you've gone off and done a lot of that on your own, it won't really be an issue. But there are ways to fix it there too, so it's not really the end of the world. You just kind of got to know what to look for. For now, we can just check if it's less than or equal to 0, meaning this animation is complete. If the animation was fully able to finish and didn't transition to anything else, including itself, then the player can return to idle. The character is now done, their stun should be up, different things like that. That's transition rule 1. Transition rule 2 now is the other one, and this one should not be automatic rule based on sequence, same as the first one, but we are going to have an event in this one, in the start transition event, and I call it start stun low. And you're like, why would you go from low hit reaction to idle but start stun low? Because we're going to skip the idle state. Okay? We see the transition. It says, yes, I can return from low hit reaction to idle. But in that event that we have, in the start transition event, so before it even gets to the idle event, we have start stun low, which is going to set the state back to stunned low, which is instantly going to change from this transition to idle to low hit reaction. And then it's going to perform the same logic that we did the first time the character was hit. So in the event graph, you do the same thing. You search for this, right? Start stun low. Click it. And then you get your character reference. You set your state to stunned low. Alright, and now let's see what the condition is to take that transition rule. So the first one was if the animation was completed. The other condition is if the state is stunned low. So what that means is that it will see this transition rule and say, yes, we should go to low, and then it will trigger that event, which sets the state back to low. And it seems silly, right? It seems like, why are we doing that? We're already low. Why would we set it back to low? But again, we're tricking idle here. We're saying, okay, it's low. Remember, we switched it to recovery once we entered the stun event. So now if we get hit again, take damage does its work, and it sets the stun state to be low again. And so it'll say, okay, it's low. But then it would just take it back to idle. We don't want that. By calling the start transition event, which is setting the state to be low, you guessed it, now idle to low hit reaction, its transition rule is character state equals stun low. So it's going to skip going to idle and instantly blend to idle to low hit reaction. And the way that actually ends up looking is low hit reaction back to low hit reaction. It does start the transition and the animation over, but if you look at fighting games like Killer Instinct and Street Fighter, this is how it's done. You have the animation of the character being hit. The character is hit again, and they just go back to the start of that animation. You know, your animations may be different for being comboed or things like that, but as far as standard attacks go, standard jabs, standard attacks of this type, that's all that actually happens. And now it's really easy to copy this logic over, but we'll go through it. Mid-hit reaction has end stunned animation on entered state, always reset on entry, and it's got 2 transition rules back to idle. They're not set to be automatic. There's no event on the first one, and all the first one does is check if the relevant anim time remaining is less than or equal to 0, if the animation is finished. Then, the other rule of mid-hit reaction back to idle is that the character state equals stun mid. Since it was set to recovery when initially hit and initially entered the stun animation, now being hit by a mid attack will trigger this transition rule, which would set mid-hit reaction going back to idle. It will trigger the start stun mid, which we've set up to set the character state to be stunned mid, which will skip the idle animation and immediately blend from idle to mid-hit reaction, because the rule is character state equals stun mid. And lastly, same with high hit reaction. Same stuff in here. And then you have your 1 transition rule, which checks the relevant time remaining. High hit reaction, less than or equal to 0, if the animation is complete. not automatic and no event on the first one. And then on the second transition rule, we check if the character state is stunned high. And if it is, we start taking this transition, which triggers the start stun high transition event, which sets the character state to be stunned high. And because of that, it skips the idle, takes the idle to high hit reaction because it's idle to stunned high. Alright? And I left these as non-shared rules so that it was a little bit cleaner. But we do already have rules for stun low, stun mid, and stun high. So if you wanted, you could go ahead and convert these to shared rules. Now, that's good, and that'll work if you're doing the same attack. If you're getting hit, you get hit with a mid, you're in the mid hit reaction, and you get hit with another mid. But it's not always the case. You might be in mid, and you get hit with a low, and we still want to go to that reaction. So if that's the case, then it's very, very simple. We have our shared rules already, like I just talked about. I'm trying to make this as neat as possible. It's pretty darn ugly right now, and there's no way I'm going to fix it right here. But, and also in real, pick the ugliest colors, by the way, like literally the hardest colors to see. However, it's pretty simple, the logic here. So mid hit reaction, just make sure it can go to low hit reaction, high hit reaction. See, I just use the shared rules as well. I'm using high hit reaction. So mid should have high hit reaction rule for the high hit reaction transition, and the low hit reaction rule for the low hit reaction transition. Easy enough. And you're going to copy that for all. High should have the mid hit reaction to the mid hit reaction, and it should have the low hit reaction rule to the low hit reaction state. Lastly, low hit reaction state should have a transition to the mid hit reaction state using the mid hit reaction rule, and the low hit reaction state should have a transition to the high hit reaction state using the high hit reaction rule. Very, very simple in terms of how it works, but just doing that is all you need. You don't need any events or anything. And then you can transition between hit reactions when you should. So we'll look at it one more time with everything in place, and we'll see how everything looks. So you can see I can go up to my opponent, I can hit them, and they will return to idle. I can hit them again at any point during their stun. And I've really, really made these hit reactions long, by the way. Obviously, they are not like that. They are fractions of a second. But in this case, I can hit him at any point. He will get stunned again, and then he will return. And I can do it with the low as well. I can also, and I'm going to kill him here, so won't really help me at all. Give me 1 second. Let me defeat my opponent. Alright. So I can also go ahead and hit him low, hit him mid, and he cancels out into the mid. And you can do the same with low. There you go. So feel free to change your hit reactions to match, animations and speeds that work. But other than that, as long as you can see it working, you should be good to go. We're kind of abusing the state machine here to make it work the way we want. I don't believe it's fragile in any way, but as I said, if there are any issues with blends or montages, let me know. I do have some ways that I can check and fix certain things that we haven't covered yet, just because I've had to do it in the past. So there's definitely solutions here. But if you run into any specific issues, let me know and we'll talk it over. Otherwise, that should be pretty much perfect for everything you need it for. And we can start getting into combos very soon, so get ready for that. Alright guys, so that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for the channel and me than anything else you can do, so I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge, huge shout out to my Patreon members and YouTube subscribers. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for continuing to give me support. I really, really appreciate it. And I love working on this series, and I can't wait to see what we make out of it. Lastly, guys, if you need any assistance, feel free to check out the Discord. There's a link in the description, and I'd be happy to help you with any problems you had. That's all I got, guys, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.